Hello, everyone. How are you today? Sorry to be a couple minutes late. I had some people I was trading messages with about what I'm talking about today, and it took me a second to get over here. Um, if you are bored, it always a fun time to talk, right? So there will be some people coming along here in a minute to join. I think. If not, you've got just me and a whole bunch of numbers. Um, uh, um, Public info. So one second. Sorry about that. I had one person asking me what I was talking about. So Hasbro as a company has been having some challenges off and on. And there's been about a billion YouTube videos and people saying, "Oh, look, it's because of Dungeons and Dragons, and the sky is falling, and the world's going to stop rotating upon its axis, and we're all going to die." So I decided to go through and actually look at the numbers because numbers actually matter in some cases, and when you're just talking about things and you don't use numbers, I tend to ignore you. So I went through and said, "Hey, let's check out the numbers." So here they are: Q3 earnings. And the reason I'm doing this is because Hasbro is going to report earnings again next month, and I kind of wanted to get in front of it and say, "Hey, look, what do they got going on?" Partially because if the company's got a chance to turn around, their stock could go up. If the company's not going to turn around, maybe their stock isn't going to go up, and I want to leave it alone. So I thought, check it out, see what it's doing. And before I dive into it, it no problem. I was having some people from some of my followers that might want to join. Um, but it so anyway, let's go back to what I was talking about. Numbers actually matter, right? So if we're going to talk about something, we should at least understand what it is we're talking about. And one of the things that really bothers me about a lot of YouTube channels is people tend to come on and go, "Well, I haven't seen this, I haven't read about it, and I'm not going to look at it, but here's why it's wrong," right? So I like to actually look at the stuff. Call me silly, but it actually seems to make sense that you actually look at the numbers when you talk about things rather than just talking out your butt. So here we go. Hasbro as a company is having some problems. They're in the middle of a lawsuit. They've got some financial problems. They've got some debt problems. They've got other things going on. And there's some claims running around the social circles that, "Oh, look, it's because they screwed up Dungeons and Dragons and they went woke and all this other crap." And I wanted to see for myself. Kind of wanted to look into it and say, "Look, is that really the case?" And part of the problem is it's really tough. I finally kind of figured out how to do it. It's really tough to separate out Dungeons and Dragons from everything else, Wizards of the Coast, because they don't really separate it too much except in one spot. And I think I found the one place they kind of let the cat out of the bag on just how big or little some of these things are. And when it comes to communities that are kind of a pain in the neck, Dungeons and Dragons, if you're the business owner, man, sometimes people are just a pain. For instance, there's a problem with, some people just get all upset that, well, gee, this book is the one everybody should use if you're a true player. And if you use this book, you're not a true player and you're evil. Well, those two books can exist on the same shelf. It's okay. The world won't stop rotating upon its axis, and we'll all be able to breathe tomorrow. Now, let's look at Hasbro. So what do they really do, right? So they've got three kind of focus areas. They focus on play. They want to. Their people. Their company is designed to kind of make you have a good time, right? They're not selling you stuff you need. They're selling you stuff that entertain you, right? So it's a tough business to be in because it's a very competitive business and it's very moody, right? So you might decide something's fine one time, something's not fine another. So you kind of have to go back and forth on what is entertaining versus what isn't, and that's tough because you really have to kind of predict it 6 or 8 months out, and it gets challenging. You do have to focus on the bottom line. You have to prioritize. You have to figure out where you put your money and where you expect to get it back out. And I've seen businesses do things like this where they say, "Well, I'm going to take a bet, and I'm going to say, it's going to be over here versus over there." And I'm going to add somebody to our stage here. Welcome to the stream, the Dungeon Delver from deep in the heart of Florida.
Hey, Tim, how are you, man?
Great. How are you, sir? I haven't talked to you in a while.
It's been a minute or two. It's been too long, actually. I want to apologize to our audience and to you, Tim, if there's a little bit of background noise. As I've said before on my show, I do have to share studio space with laundry space. So, and it being Sunday, it's laundry day.
Hey,
So I
it's
apologize if there's a little bit of noise back there. I've set
laundry
up
day
my
at my house
filter.
also. Uh,
Right on.
and I was just telling people that, part of the reason I want to do this is because there have been an enormous number of live streams and YouTube channels and Twitter folks and whoever else that say, well, Hasbro's coming down and it's the fault of Dungeons and Dragons. And, it's all D&D that's going to destroy Hasbro. And some people, for whatever reason, don't believe this book and this book can sit on the same shelf without causing a fire in the house. And they can. It's okay. Both those things can exist in the same world, and we're not going to die. But I wanted to go through Hasbro's numbers. And we won't solve things like, name calling inside the community anytime soon. But I wanted to explain partially why I think the community needs to learn to get together and be nice to each other a little bit. Because I think the truth is in the numbers. And we'll get to my point in a minute. And since Bill is a grognard and avid first edition guy, I wanted to say, look, it's okay that the first edition guys and the fifth or 5.5E or whatever it is, people get along. It's okay. We should allow that. But sometimes the community doesn't. And I think we should all start to take a little deep breath on occasion instead of screaming at each other so often. And here's why. And it's in the numbers as to why that's the case. So if I can convince Bill, I can probably convince anybody. That's the key here. But anyway, so this is Hasbro. This is the start of their Q3 earnings. The reason I wanted to do this is Q4 is due out in February, and Q4 is going to have Christmas in it, which is a big deal. Q4 is also going to have the release of the new Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master Guide, and it won't have, to some certain extent, because they kind of came out late in the quarter, have partial quarter run, but it won't have the Monster Manual because that's not due out till next month, I think. It might be later this month, but it's not out yet. So, but Hasbro is a company. I mean, their job is to entertain people. So if you're in a tight economy, that's a tough business to be in because your entertainment budget is usually the first one to get slashed, right? So we're going to take a look at these numbers and see where they go and see if Dungeons and Dragons is something Hasbro even cares about, or whether if it went to zero, they would be like, okay, who cares? Move on. And I contend that if it went to almost zero, they wouldn't care much. So let's take a look at their third quarter highlights. Well, they would care a little bit. And here's, they don't want it to go to zero, but revenue wise, if it went to zero, they wouldn't care. But I'll show you why it makes a difference to them in a minute. So third quarter highlights, total Hasbro revenue went down by 15%, which declined 9%, excluding the E1 divestiture. Now, E1, Bill, you know what it was, right? The entertainment group. They were making movies like Battleship and
right, yeah.
Right. So they got rid of that. They went, okay, boom. And that was actually one of the reasons the Dungeons and Dragons streaming series that Joe Manganiello was working on died, was because it was through E1. And now they have to kind of go restart production from the beginning, finding a new partner and all this other crap. So
right.
That sale kind of screwed a lot of things up for the video adaptations of movies and streaming series. Now, despite growth in Magic, Wizard segment is down 5%. Why is it down 5%? It's not because Dungeons and Dragons sales sucked. It's because Baldur's Gate 3 came out the year prior in the same quarter, and Baldur's Gate 3 was a massive freaking hit.
Sure.
Those numbers were huge. Right?
Yeah.
So now you're trying to compete with a huge number, and you're not going to do it. And everybody knows that, right? So consumer products declined by 10% due to exited brand, reduced closeouts, and softer than anticipated volume. Got it. Okay. 87% net cost savings across supply chain and operating expenses. By owned retail inventory remain healthy level. Okay. I don't know that I agree with this. The both owned and retail inventory remain at a healthy level because there's a lawsuit about this one going on where the shareholders are suing Hasbro over fudging the inventory numbers.
Yes, I did a video on that a few months ago. I don't have the URL to hand, but essentially, yeah, there's an investment group, and a lot of times there's a lot said about, people who own stocks in companies, and generally speaking, you're not talking about the little old lady who lives up the street and, gets a pension check and that
You're
sort of
talking
thing.
hedge fund guys that own hundreds of
You're
millions of
talking
dollars.
hedge funds, guys. But regarding this suit, you are talking about a bunch of retirees.
Right.
And it was them specifically who were sold on the idea of, hey, this is Hasbro, it's fun, it's toys. People always buy toys and games, and it turns out Hasbro was cooking the books a little bit, as they say in the vernacular, and so they got themselves an attorney, and they're doing a class action lawsuit.
Right.
So in this particular case, it is a group of small investors.
It is, and my guess is that's going to settle out of court at some point.
Oh, unquestionably, they're not gonna take a PR black eye for firemen. These are actually retired firemen that are on this investment group.
The fireman pension funds are no joke. Those things are massive.
Yeah.
Venture capital firms argue over who gets them, right? I mean, they're huge.
Yeah. So I think
groups,
Hasbro will take this seriously enough to stop any kind of PR flap beyond what has already come.
And it's interesting you bring that up, because the PR groups, I want to make a point here that Wizards of the Coast is separate from Hasbro corporate. Okay.
Yes.
Wizards doesn't own, or Hasbro doesn't own 100% of Wizards. It's owned by a couple of people. So when PR mistakes happen at Wizards, and they have happened a lot in the last couple of years, everything from the OSR to people like me can't leave fast enough to the 4 pages in front of the 50th anniversary book. Those PR disasters probably caused some PR people to have a drinking problem. I know I would. But the PR group at Hasbro, a multi-billion-dollar company, is going to be a completely different group, and they're telling somebody at the CEO office, figure out how big a check you have to write these people and do it fast, right? So
sure.
that's where that's going. It's not the same group. Those are entirely different teams.
Sure. And okay. I promise you, when the Wizards of the Coast locked horns with Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, I mean, that was over before it got started. Because they were just like, I am entirely certain somebody from Hasbro picked up the phone and said, make this go away now.
Yeah, that could have been worse than the OSR scandal gun.
Yeah.
Because Margaret, I've never met her, but everybody I know who has says she is the nicest person on the face of planet Earth. And if you cross her and make her mad, that's tough to do.
Yeah, she is always the very few interactions I've had with her here on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and whatnot. She has always been exceptionally nice, even though I've called for total Kender death. she has always been just as kind and as nice as possible. And I had a great aunt, very much like that. And the flip side of that, boys and girls, is that type of personality usually has a steel side. Stay on the soft and fluffy side. Don't get over on the steel side.
Absolutely. So Bill, yesterday, just so you know, I went through an article in Dragon Magazine number 101 called All About Kender.
Yes, I commented on it, Tim. I don't know if you recall.
And I am planning one that is from Dragon Magazine number 102 that is called All About Gully Dwarves.
Okay.
But apparently I'm not allowed to talk for longer than 2 minutes. Only 2. Anyway, back to what we're talking about. Adjusted operating margin improvement driven by favorable business mix, supply chain productivity, and lower operating costs, which is financial gobbledygook for we figured out how to make more money off the same volume than we used to by shifting around cost centers, probably. Maybe they went a little bit more vertically integrated than they used to be or something, but they went back to their supply chain and beat them up for better pricing, and they lowered their cost.
Mm-hmm.
Having worked at massive companies, just so everybody knows, I've worked at multi-billion-dollar companies, and I've worked in the venture space, and I've been a business owner. So it's like the bigger you are, the more leverage you have on your supply chain to go back and say, give me a better price, and that you don't care. And I've actually seen it to where you'll beat the little guy up to where their margins are 8 or 10%, and the big guy who's buying it from their margin is 25. So it's like, the big guy makes all the money and the little guy takes it in the short, so to speak. So, but you got to have that business because they're buying so much from you. It's a terrible thing to do, but it's the way it works. Operating cash improvement continued through third quarter, driven by improved operating results. So same thing. It's financial language for we figured out how to squeeze more money out. Earnings per share growth from favorable business mix and improved profitability, which means they pushed. What that translates to in English is they did more revenue in the higher margin businesses than they used to do, which is important. Okay, 9 months. So that's the quarter. I'm not going to worry about 9 months. Basically, it's the same stuff. But what you'll see is that net revenue went down a little bit. That's the Baldur's Gate thing. Along with probably a few other things. There's when you have bigger releases of some brands, coming up, some people will put off purchasing things, and they'll probably put off releasing things. For instance, Christmas was coming up. There was a bunch of toy releases. Maybe third quarter was different, but I think a lot of that was driven by Baldur's Gate because it was so huge. Because you're talking 15%, that's to a couple $100 million, and Baldur's Gate probably made up that difference by itself. So operating profit was $302 million, which was up a lot because last year they lost money, right? So now they're making it instead of losing it. That's a good thing to do. Earnings before debt and income up, all that's good. I'm not going to worry about the 3 months because it's just aggregating a couple of quarters together. Highlights for third quarter. Transformer 1. My kids aren't into Transformers anymore, but I do kind of miss those days, to be honest. Yeah. Beyblades, these things are massive with kids in a certain age range, but they're massive for like 2 years, and then kids kind of age out of them. But they are huge. Magic the Gathering, obviously, which is huge. Monopoly Go, which is actually probably one of the biggest profit centers that at least margin wise that they've got. That thing is massive in the gaming space. And margin wise, it's got to be insane. Now, I did some digging on Magic the Gathering, and it'll prove out in the numbers a little bit later on, or at least I'll show you kind of where I got it because I had to go through about 20 spreadsheets to really pull it out. But Magic the Gathering to Wizards of the Coast is kind of like the thing that you care about, and Dungeons and Dragons is those guys. Let's talk about them for a minute, because annually speaking, Dungeons and Dragons probably accounts for $100 to $150 million for Wizards of the Coast in revenue, give or take. Magic the Gathering accounts for give or take $1 billion. Okay, 1 billion with a B compared to 100 million. So if you're a company, the only one of those two you really care a lot about is Magic the Gathering.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons I think the Dungeons and Dragons community should learn to not scream at each other quite so much, because when Hasbro Corporate is trying to figure out and get the sense of the community, guess what? They get out there and they look around, they get all confused. They're like, okay, fine, we're just going to do whatever they want because you guys are all crazy anyway. We're going to do it. And that's fine. I mean, people are going to disagree, but there's people out there that will actually, are legit, I think, angry without a reason kind of things, right? So the number of times I've seen podcasts and others where people are decrying books that nobody on the podcast has read, refuses to touch, and won't even, admit ever having been in the same room with. But let me spend an hour explaining why it's bad, right? When I'm the company owner that kind of stuff is going on, I don't pay attention to those people. And then those people get even angrier because they're not being listened to, but you just kind of define that you're not their customer set, right? So why would I care as a business owner what you have to say? And then you see arguments going on like Ginger Blast. Harmony Ginger is like, there's this knockdown drag out over on Twitter about her being mean. And she's not mean. She's opinionated, but her opinions are backed up. And she's actually converted me on a few things on occasion. So I think the community, as a result of being as small as it is, need to just take a beat on occasion and figure out, hey, if we speak with one voice, as we deal with the OGL scandal, Hasbro would listen.
Exactly.
But when you speak with 50 voices and all of them are angry, and typically they're angry with each other, Hasbro's not going to care.
Well, I think that was the only time that Hasbro was ever legitimately afraid of the D&D community, because you had everyone from guys like me who will, I'll show up at a convention with original D&D and grab an unscheduled table in the middle of the concourse and sit down and run a game with the three little brown books, all the way up to people like Ginny D and Bob the World Builder and people like that. We were all shoulder to shoulder with the attitude of, you done fucked up, Hasbro. you have screwed up, and
Bill doesn't never use an F-bomb, man. So that's a
yeah. I apologize for there on your channel, Tim, but yeah, no, it was a glorious moment, and I honestly think watching a corporate giant like Hasbro, like Wizards of the Coast, stagger backwards under the gale force of opinions on that was great.
And they issued a public apology.
They issued a public apology. There was
awesome.
And I mean, corporations do not maneuver as quickly as Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro were having to maneuver back in the winter of 2023. And they just kept performing one PR blunder. I don't think 2023, from a PR standpoint, that's just going to be this inexplicable, in corporate history, data expunged moment for them.
Going to be an MBA courses under what not to do.
Yeah, exactly. They could literally do nothing right, and that's not in the court of public opinion. That is objective fact. If they could do something right or wrong at a given moment on a PR front in 2023, Wizards of the Coast did the wrong thing. They did exactly the wrong thing at every step when it would be high profile and damaging to brand.
So let me give you a couple of examples on where this could have been better. Right. So the OGL scandal made everybody so angry that what has gone on in the community is now people are looking, right? So somebody explained to me years ago that if you get audited by the IRS, just say, yes, you're right. Otherwise, you're going to give them a chance to dig, right? So never give people a chance to dig. So what they did with the OGL scandal, I think, is they made people start looking, right? And dug deep. So this book right here, which, yes, I own it. I bought it. I am not a corporate shill for Hasbro. They don't pay me and they don't send me free stuff. I paid for this. Okay. The world went nuts over this book because of 4 paragraphs in the front. And they were 4 of the most atrocious paragraphs you could possibly imagine, insulting everybody from Gary to the guy that delivered Gary's milk when he was a kid, practically, or something. So this book, I think, was another PR nightmare for him. Now, the interesting thing is, outside of the 4 pages in the front and those 4 or 5 paragraphs, this is a good book. It's got some fantastic stuff in it. It's got some handwritten notes by Gary and Dave back and forth on some of the first copies that just aren't out there anymore. It's got letters back and forth between them. It's got all kinds of things. And the only other thing, I read it cover to cover, outside of the intro and the preface, or those 4 pages by 2 guys, and it was really just 5 paragraphs. The only other thing in here that you might call offensive is that at one point they said, well, gee, to certain religious groups, it might be offensive for them to have to go fight Krishna because it's a god, right? So maybe that's offensive to somebody, and we're sorry. And I get it, right? If he has to Christian to go fight Jesus, maybe he's offended. But it really, if it had not been for all that stuff up front, I don't think anybody would have cared about that paragraph, right? And people would have let it go. But now people are on the lookout, right? So now this book is, for people want to burn it at the stake, and nobody wants to touch it because it's evil and all that crap. When honestly, it's got some good history in it. It really does. At least I think it does. And now with the release of the new editions of the Player's Handbook of the Dungeon Master Guide, people are on the lookout for politics. And I saw a ton of people talking about the Player's Handbook going, oh, it's got politics on every page. I read it cover to cover, dude. It's not in there. In fact, gender is never mentioned, sex is never mentioned, male and female is never even mentioned in the book, whereas it is in previous editions. So now people are just kind of, looking for it. And I guess in the artwork, maybe you can make some claims, but the only thing I noticed about the artwork is that in previous editions, you had people, or in the artwork, you would have characters having a struggle. They'd be in a fight. Maybe they're going to live, maybe they're not going to live, right? You're kind of scared of this picture because this Trampier image, because what happens when they pry that gem out of the eyeball, or does the thing come to life and kill you, right? You don't know what's going on. But in the new edition, all the characters are obviously winning or happy, and that was kind of weird to me. So I was like, there's no struggle here. But anyway, that's not why we're here today. So we're going to dive on deeper into these numbers. So third quarter performance, revenue, 404. Now, Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming. This is where they start to pull it out. So if you look at the way Hasbro breaks out their numbers, you got Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming, consumer products, and entertainment. So WotC is 404 million of the 1.2 billion dollars that got done in third quarter. So they're about a third. So WotC matters. Okay. WotC matters way more than the amount of revenue they produce because of this line right here. Do you see the line I have highlighted, Bill?
Mm-hmm.
Margin.
Consumer
products margin is 10%. WotC's margin is 48%. Guess which division Hasbro cares a whole lot more about based on risk? Wizards of the Coast is keeping Hasbro afloat because of their margins. So if you look at it very carefully, $860 million in consumer products, forget entertainment for a second, because that's just E1 and it's about to all go away. 806, and the entertainment is also some licensing to kid shows and whatnot, but it's too small to care about. So I'm only going to look at consumer products and Wizards of the Coast. $860 million with a 10% margin gets you $121 million in operating profit or loss. The $404 million, or less than half of what the other group does, gives you $181 million in operating profit or loss. Guess who is the golden child of Hasbro? It ain't the people putting out Monopoly.
No, it is not.
It's Wizards of the Coast. So when you say Wizards of the Coast is being badly run and they suck, Hasbro doesn't think that.
They don't.
Because of that column right there. It's high margin, and that is all being driven by Magic the Gathering because they're doing $1 billion a year, and it is minuscule in price to produce compared to what people are paying for cards. Right. So that's Wizards of the Coast is like the CEO of Hasbro is calling them and going, what can we do to help you? We like you guys. We love you. How can we make your life better? Right. WotC, and I see a lot of times on Twitter, and Bill, you've probably seen him. Yeah. How can you get WotC out of Hasbro? Well, the answer is you can't. They're not letting that thing go. Not in a million years are they going to let that product line go, because that's what's keeping them afloat. That profit margin right there is why Hasbro will never in a billion years let go of Wizards of the Coast. That number, right? It's just not going to happen. Bill, am I completely offline here?
No, I'm here.
Okay, so I don't see it. Right, so everybody who comes out and says, "Oh, they should just sell it," like I saw one time. Some people are like, "Oh, Hasbro should just give Wizards of the Coast to Margaret Weiss. She'd know what to do with it." I'm like, first off, Margaret Weiss is a fantastic woman. She's a writer, and she has probably no interest in running a gaming company. Right? So,
no,
completely different skill sets. But yeah, Hasbro's not letting go of this thing, right? It's not going to happen.
No. Well, I think there's an asterisk there, but we're talking about, we're talking about like different planetary bodies, if I can use a clumsy analogy. There was some talk, I think it was either late 2023 or very, very early 2024. I did a video about that as well, when there was a rumor that Hasbro was shopping WotC to Tencent. And of course, from Hasbro and WotC, they were like, "What? No, that's crazy talk. No, we're not. It's a misunderstanding from something that Tencent said about certain video game rights we were talking to them about." And then other people came in and said, "No, they never sell." When you start talking about the kind of money that Tencent could throw around, yes, I think Hasbro could let Wizards of the Coast go, but they're not going to let Wizards of the Coast go to a bunch of well-meaning people who really, really like Dungeons and Dragons and have scraped together a few $1,000,000. That is never going to happen. That is a fever dream.
So if you look at just normal multiples and what it would take to buy something, it would almost be less expensive to buy controlling interest in Hasbro than it would to buy Wizards of the Coast.
If you wanted to get Dungeons and Dragons, if you were just that kind of crazy, like Sultan of Brunei, Elon Musk's level of, Jeff Bezos kind of rich, that would be your route of attack to try and gain control of Hasbro. Because my cold dead hands springs to mind when you start talking about getting Hasbro to give up WotC and therefore Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I mean, their margins are just too high. Hasbro is not going to let it go.
Yeah.
So if you dig deeper and deeper in here, what you find is over and over again, Wizards of the Coast is the golden child. So the deeper I dig, Hasbro is a poorly run company because they've got too much inventory. They've got things piling up on them. But even if you get down here into the Wizards of the Coast operating performance, you're still looking at year to date of 38% versus Q3 of 48%. So, it's Wizards of the Coast is a well-run group, financially speaking. So to convince Hasbro that they're doing something wrong, if the community really wants to convince Hasbro they're doing something wrong, there is one way to do it, and that is to speak with a singular voice. Speaking with 50 voices, all of which are saying different things and half of which are insulting each other, is never, ever going to get you there. So when you see people like Grognards and others sniping at each other, and some of it's, I get it, right? So I have kids that they're not probably going to play first edition ever just because they're teenagers and they don't want to. But if they'll play the newer ones, but they're not going to play the old ones. But getting the Grognards and the fifth edition people around a table to agree, it takes something like the OGL scandal to do it. When I think the community in general needs to learn how to do is to tolerate our opinions, so that once in a while, when Hasbro does mess something up, like those 4 pages in the front of the 50th anniversary book, we can speak with a loud enough voice to make a difference. But when we all come with different voices, forget it. We're going to go away. But we need to become tolerant of one another in ways that we aren't normally tolerant.
And Tim, that speaks to something that I've been saying a lot lately, and I will always caveat my opinions about whatever D&D. Look, I want people to play OD&D and first edition AD&D. I think it's really keen. It is the version of D&D I like to play on the occasions I get to play. It is the version that I like to run. I'm kind of a forever DM.
When was the last thing you actually got to play, man?
Play AD&D? Well, Kyle runs a little bit on the live stream show on Wednesday, so I can't complain too much because I do get to play a little bit of AD&D on live stream on Wednesday. But my attitude is this: people are like, ooh, I don't want, Shadow Dark is still too much like 5e or this, that, and the other. My attitude is, if your path to AD&D and OD&D starts with 5th edition or with 6th edition or with 4th edition or 3rd edition or 3.5 or Pathfinder or what have you, that's great. That's fantastic. No good thing ever survived by gatekeeping out people who genuinely wanted to be part of it just because of where they came from. You know, if you say, hey, yeah, you know, my group tried 5e, but I've watched your videos, or I've watched Harmony Ginger, or you know, I've done this, I've done that, I've seen the community, and yeah, I want to try D&D. My first response is not, ick, you started with 5e, you are tainted, and I don't want you to play, so go away. So the game is served best by say, you know, if you're going to evangelize, by saying, hey, you know what, if you like D&D in general, but you want something grittier, you can try an older edition. And I just happen to have the cure for the 5e fruit salad. If you want to come play, you know, it is easier to, or rather, you draw more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. That's my attitude towards that. I don't edition war anymore. I will take playful jabs, but I don't. There's literally negative profit in it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not paid by Hasbro. You're not paid by Hasbro. I'm not sponsored by anybody except myself. So, and I don't think you're sponsored by anybody but yourself. So, I know you were doing something with a game company for a while, but I think last time I saw your channel, you were just, you know, the organizational chart of one, I think.
Yes, my org chart is a rectangle with my name in the middle, but a dear friend of mine for a good year and change was my sponsor. Now I'm sponsored by Paint Minis Live, but I won't do a plug. But we're just kind of starting that up. But yeah, for the most part, if I say something good about a given company, it's because I really like what they do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sponsored by, I guess you could say I'm sponsored by One for All Social because it's my company and where my paycheck comes from. But outside of that, it has nothing to do with gaming. So let's go back to the balance sheet here. So, you know, they've got a whole bunch of cash. So it looks like they raised a bunch of cash in the last year, but what they did was they took on a pile of debt. They took on like $500 million in debt. So somewhere on here, you'll see, you know, current portion of long-term debt, you know, $500 million. They had some bonds coming due, so they took out new bonds to go pay the old bonds. Typical corporate, you know.
Okay, this is a numbers thing that you have talked a lot about. In your research here, did you find out, or do you know how much commercial real estate debt is Hasbro holding?
I can find out. 1 second.
Because that's been like a huge thing for you, and you know, a huge thing that you've observed rather. And I think it could be an interesting injection into this to look at the health of the body politic at Hasbro.
That I don't know. I don't know how much they have in total in real estate debt. They don't really break it out quite that way. At least not that I've seen in here, at least in their bigger numbers, at least their searchable ones. It may be in there somewhere, but in the documents that they have that are searchable, I don't see it coming up, and some of them are hundreds of pages long.
Okay.
But so their total debt is in here somewhere at liability. So current portion of long-term debt that's coming due. So they owe $7 billion. Okay. So that's a big number. I'm sorry, that's equity, long-term debt. So they 5.9 billion. So they got $5.9 billion in debt. That's a big number. Is it a big number for a company that does this kind of volume? Well, it depends on what the interest rates are. You know, it's not a debt to income ratio I would hold in one of my companies. Mm-hmm. And if people aren't aware, I'm sort of a serial entrepreneur, a physicist by training, but I wound up in the venture capital space, and I wouldn't own a company that has that kind of debt to income ratio because I believe debt is toxic. I like actually owning the thing that I'm operating, not the bank owns it and I get to operate it as long as we keep cash flow going. That's just me. MBAs will tell you that's a stupid thing to do. I get it. Some people will think that, but I like it my way. You can like it yours all day long. I don't want to take that kind of risk because that's a 5.9 billion is a big ass number pile of debt. So yeah, the total liabilities of 7.2. No, thank you. Not my jam. But when you're running 300 million in profit, on a $7.2 billion at debt load, you can make the payments. Yeah. I mean, they're still running profit per share it was way back at the front. I should have remembered that off the top of my head. $1.59 diluted earnings per share after debt and income. So, they're still making $1.50 a share. So, they're paying their debt. They're just carrying it, which I certainly don't like, because if your sales drop quickly, you're screwed. But
and one thing I would say, just about the overall profitability, and this is something that you had mentioned earlier about, this is dipped and this has fallen off and the other's fallen off. I don't make a lot on YouTube, but when my channel really just blew up, when I started talking about the OGL scandal, there were probably 4 months when I was putting out like sometimes as many as 3 or 4 videos a day, because Wizards of the Coast was screwing stuff up that fast and news was leaking that fast. And I'd put out a video and it'd get 6,000 views, 7,000, which for me is big. I know people out there are like, "Ooh, sorry, dude, 6,000 views." No, for me, that was huge. And because that's ad revenue and that's click through, and I was just over the hump on monetization, I saw for a few months, for me, little old me who works out of a converted garage that is half laundry room, half studio, I saw just insane numbers. And I also saw a pretty handsome chunk of money coming from YouTube. Now, when things settled down and YouTube started showing me my metrics in that following summer, when there was kind of a lull, when things were back down to a dull roar of screw ups, saying, you're down 695% over the last 28 days on views. You're down negative 173% on earnings over the last 28 days or whatever. And to look at that in a vacuum, yeah, that sounds horrible, but that's just a return to mean. That's not like I was profitable for years and then I fell off. That was just a return to mean.
Yeah. And and I will tell you this, and I own a social media company. So for those of you who don't know, I own One for All Social. We interact with all the big social platforms. And I founded it. I'm the chief technology officer. Actually, technically my title is chief wizarding officer, but that's a different story. That's just because I thought it was cool. But it, when you're trying to monetize on social media, don't quit your day job until you're like really doing well. Okay.
Yeah. You've got to be staring down the barrel of like, I would say at least 750,000 subs. And at that point, you're kind of making.
If you're not pulling 10 grand a month, don't quit your day job.
Yeah. Exactly. Because exactly.
But if they change the monetization standards, you got to ask yourself, am I still going to be making 10 grand a month, or am I going to be making 800? Right. And they do change those standards often. So don't quit your day job.
But I didn't conclude my thought. I left a dangling mental participle. If you look at Hasbro and you see like, oh, their profits are off. It's like Tim said, it's because they don't have another Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 was a spike, not a plateau.
And it's just business as normal now.
Yeah.
So here's another number you were asking about, the current long-term debt, $3.9 billion, but $500 million is repaid in November 2024. So they're down to 3 point something. It's still a debt to income ratio that I don't find attractive. Now, if you look at Hasbro as a company, and I put my, hey, I've been an entrepreneur hat on, and I've made, I won't say, I've done some big stuff. if you look at it from a pure business perspective, I don't like those numbers. Now, in a retail business space, these numbers are not best in class. They're not horrible, but they're not best in class. The one thing Hasbro needs to worry about for their foreseeable future is not Dungeons and Dragons tanking. It's not Wizards of the Coast doing badly. It's that lawsuit. If they can fix that, everything else that they've got wrong is not that bad. I mean, debt to income is horrible and they should fix it, but they've got enough cash flow and margin to do it. So when you see YouTube videos, and I won't say who, because there's a couple of channels that love to do this. Oh, there's a crisis in art role-playing games. Oh, it's over. That's it. The end of it is near. It's not the case. That gets clicks and that gets views on those YouTube channels, but not every day is a crisis in the role-playing game community. Hasbro is not going out of business, and Wizards of the Coast is their cash cow.
Yeah.
So when you see things like, there was a week or so ago, some people were all upset that people were Dungeons and Dragons was going to show up on a slot machine or something. Like they licensed it to some Vegas group and they were going to put it on a slot machine. And so people were really upset. Okay.
I don't know why that. I don't know why people would be upset about that.
Well, people wanted to somehow compare it to now you're enticing kids to gamble, and it's the same as buying microtransactions in an app. And I'm like, guys, it's a freaking slot machine. Who cares?
I made a post about that. It may have even been in response to that, Tim. I posted about it, guys. My fellow grognards seem to be viewing that is grognards who are upset about that, and I know that's not all of them, because I had a lot more people agree with me than not. The 1980s was carpeted with Dungeons and Dragons merch, and that's what Gary wanted. He wanted D&D to be a huge commercial success. There was candy, beach towels, frisbees, plastic drink cups, coloring books, comic books, some of the
big wheels,
big wheels, action figures, play sets, pencils, t-shirts, hats, minifigs, not just Dungeons and Dragons gaming stuff. There was stuff you'd find on Sundry Cell, yo-yos, Duncan yo-yos with a little D&D cartoon sticker in the center. Guys, that's part and parcel, and it doesn't mean. I mean, I could go grognard and point out things that I think are bad for the D&D brand, for D&D exposure, but selling all those tchotchkes, that ain't it. That ain't a thing to get upset over, because that has been with us literally since 1977. Gary wanted D&D to be as big as Star Wars, and George Lucas did not make Star Wars big by not selling action figures, t-shirts, cereal, cups, hats, records, toys, bada. Okay.
Yeah, it was the merchandising. The
kids love the flamethrower.
Where the real money from the movie is made.
Exactly. And that's where, that's where your profits have got to live. Now, if you want Wizards of the Coast to fail hard enough that Hasbro can't find a sustainable avenue for D&D anymore, and I'm going to be on a kidney machine being turned to the window every 4 hours before that happens. Then be happy about that. But
we've gotten far enough where there's now a group of Dungeons and Dragons postage stamps, for God's sake. I mean,
yeah, I got a great set of them for Christmas. I got a framed set. I got this postcard set from the same USPS store. I think we can. We own the post office. I think we can shill, but I got this lovely set of these are our greeting cards. These are D&D greeting cards.
There's a ton of them out there. So Robert White in the chat brings up a point about the artwork looking more like Disney than it used to. And I will tell you this, and being a business owner, I put my hat on and I talked to some artists, plural, who've worked in the field for a long time. And I've talked to, and I actually thought about, because I kind of recently got to a spot where I could actually retire. And I thought about opening a cartoon company, kind of like to do Bugs Bunny era stuff, just because I thought it would be fun to do Bugs Bunny type stuff. But why does it all start to look like Disney art? Well, because when Trampier was working and we got the cover of this, the interior of the book had a bunch of pencil drawings in it, and that was kind of it. If you got anything on the inside at all, usually it was a lot of tables and words. It was stereo instructions, as Bill likes to say. The interior of this is full color with a whole bunch of art all throughout that you used to not get. Full color, everything. So there's not a group of people doing oil paintings like Trampier or the others would have done in that era. There's people using Photoshop because it's faster, and because you've now got to produce a couple hundred pages of art, full color, full blown art, instead of 4 or 5.
Well, I think
expensive. It would be so expensive to do a full color book with interior art that somebody did by oil every page versus what it was when the original books came out. It would just be so expensive that the book would cost $500 and nobody would buy it.
I would almost say let's, because you and I have talked about art in like the business end of art as well as just the appreciation of D&D art. This would almost be a discussion. I would say let's try and get you, me, Richard, and Dave S. LaForce, because he was a lot of fun to have on stream, on again to revisit this topic, because I both agree and disagree with you about the art matter, but I don't want to get us too sidelined. I'm running a tight schedule right now.
So. No, that's fine. I'm kind of done anyway. So I want to call that a stream, but I'd be happy to be on that with you, because I actually am legitimately looking at opening another company, because I'm 52 and I kind of am about to be in a position where I no longer have to work. Arguably.
Hell, I've been doing that for the past 10 years, Tim.
I think anyway. All right. Thanks for stopping by, everybody.
Thanks for inviting me, Tim.
Wizards is not leaving Hasbro, and Wizards is the cash cow. So, if you want to have Wizards listen to the community, we need to speak as one voice, not as 50 fractured voices, is my point.
All right. And Tim, it was a pleasure to be here.
Oh, yeah, you roll for that.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Stick around for 2 seconds, Bill, if you can. I'm going to.
Sure.